I felt my husband's breath on my neck as he leaned in, his fingers gripping my elbow just a fraction too hard. Just smile, nod, and please, don't embarrass me tonight, he whispered. He thought I was a nobody. He didn't know the four-star Admiral walking toward us was about to salute me. I grew up the daughter of a master sergeant. My father was a man who believed in actions, not accolades, and he raised me to do the same. When I commissioned into the United States Air Force, I didn't do it for the applause. I did it because I had a duty to my country, and over the course of 18 years, I bled, sweat, and sacrificed to earn the silver eagles that sat on my shoulders. I was Colonel Chloe Peterson, Director of Joint Intelligence Operations at the Pentagon. I held a top-secret clearance, managed a budget of $400 million, and regularly briefed the Joint Chiefs. But to my husband, Greg, I was just a government paper pusher who didn't understand the real corporate world. Greg was a senior vice president at Omnicorp Solutions, a flashy tech and logistics firm in Washington, D.C., that desperately wanted to break into the defense contracting sphere. We had met 5 years ago at a charity run. Back then, he found my military service charming. He liked the idea of dating a woman in uniform, but as he climbed the corporate ladder, his ego ballooned, and his respect for my career withered. Because my work was highly classified, I couldn't talk about my day. When he asked what I did, the standard unclassified answer was, I manage government logistics and personnel. Over time, Greg convinced himself that meant I sat in a windowless basement at the DMV, ordering office supplies and stamping forms. I let him believe it. It was easier than fighting, and honestly, the less he knew about my actual deployments to undisclosed locations in the Middle East, the safer my operations were. But his ignorance had recently mutated into outright contempt. The night of the Omnicorp annual leadership gala, the tension in our townhouse was suffocating. This wasn't just any gala. Omnicorp was hosting it at the prestigious St. Regis Hotel to schmooze top brass from the Department of Defense. They were bidding on a massive, multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity and drone logistics contract. Greg was convinced that tonight was his night to secure a promotion to Executive VP. "Are you wearing that?" he asked, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, adjusting his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. I looked in the mirror. I was wearing a floor-length, elegant navy blue evening gown. It was conservative but flattering, adhering to the unspoken rules of DC formal wear. "Yes. Is there something wrong with it?" Greg sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose, like I had just failed a toddler's math test. "Chloe, it's just very plain. Camilla Whitmore is going to be wearing Oscar de la Renta. I need you to look like the wife of a future executive vice president, not a mid-level bureaucrat." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from snapping. "It's a classic dress, Greg. I'll be fine." "Fine doesn't close contracts," he muttered, turning his back to me. "Just put on the diamond necklace I bought you, try to liven up your makeup, and for God's sake, let me do the talking tonight. Richard is bringing some heavy hitters from the Navy. Don't start rambling about your desk job." My jaw tightened. My desk job had kept me awake for the last 72 hours coordinating a hostage extraction in North Africa, a mission I had literally just returned from. My eyes were still heavy with jet lag, and my mind was still half a world away, replaying satellite imagery. But sure, I wouldn't ramble about my desk job. "Understood," I said coldly. The ride to the Street Regis was silent. Greg spent the entire time furiously typing on his phone, muttering to himself about quarterly projections and synergy. When the valet opened my door, the brisk DC, autumn air hit my face, a welcome relief from the suffocating atmosphere of the SUV. The ballroom was a sea of opulent excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over hundreds of DC's elite. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of champagne and caviar. It was a room vibrating with ambition, greed, and superficial charm. Almost immediately, Greg dragged me by the elbow toward a circle of people near the ice sculpture. At the center was Richard Whitmore, the CEO of Omnicorp, a man whose fake tan and booming laugh took up far too much space. Next to him was his wife Camilla, dripping in emeralds and looking perpetually bored. "Richard! Camilla! You look absolutely stunning tonight!" Greg gushed, his voice dropping an octave to sound more authoritative. "Greg, my boy," Richard clapped him on the shoulder. "Glad you made it. And this must be," Richard trailed off, looking at me with a polite but dismissive smile. "This is my wife, Chloe," Greg said quickly. "Chloe, this is Richard Whitmore, our CEO." "A pleasure," I said, extending my hand. Richard shook it limply. "So, Chloe," Camilla drawled, swirling her martini. "Greg tells us you work for the government. How quaint. What is it you do? Human resources?" "Logistics, actually," I replied smoothly. "Moving people and equipment where they need to go." "Oh, like the Postal Service?" Camilla let out a tinkling, condescending laugh. Several other executives' wives joined in. Greg's face flushed red. He stepped slightly in front of me, subtly blocking me from their direct line of sight. "Chloe is very dedicated, but it's a standard government job. You know how it is. Nothing as fast-paced as what we're doing at Omnicorp. Anyway, Richard, about the DoD contract, have we gotten any confirmation on who the Pentagon is sending tonight?" I stood there, sidelined and silenced, watching my husband shrink me down to make himself look bigger. I took a sip of my sparkling water, letting the cold liquid ground me. My father's voice echoed in my head. "Let them underestimate you, kid. The loudest guy in the room is usually the weakest." I didn't need to defend my pride to these people, but as Greg leaned into my ear a few minutes later, under the guise of an affectionate whisper, my patience finally cracked. "Stay by the bar," he murmured, his fingers gripping my elbow, his breath hot on my neck. "Just smile, nod, and please, don't embarrass me tonight. Richard is introducing me to the defense liaison soon. Do not bring up your union breaks or whatever it is you people do." He patted my arm condescendingly and walked away to join a group of laughing executives, leaving me standing entirely alone. For the next hour, I played the part of the invisible wallflower. I stood near a marble pillar, watching the absolute theater of corporate desperation unfold. Omnicorp had gone all out to impress the military brass. They had displays set up showing their new drone supply chain software, sleek promotional videos playing on giant screens, and executives practically sweating through their suits in anticipation. I recognized several mid-level defense contractors in the room, men and women I had routinely torn apart in Pentagon briefing rooms for going over budget and under-delivering. It took everything in my power not to laugh when I saw a vice president of a rival firm trying to explain secure satellite uplinks to an absolutely clueless investor. I was on my second glass of water when Brenda, the wife of Greg's direct competitor for the promotion, sauntered over. "Chloe, right?" Brenda asked, looking me up and down. "You look so comfortable." "Thank you, Brenda," I smiled politely. "Greg must be so stressed tonight," she continued, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "My husband says this DoD contract is a make or break for the division. It's so highly technical. It must be hard for you, not really understanding the world he operates in." "I manage," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Well, it's sweet that you came to support him, even if you're just standing out of the way," she smirked, turning to walk back to the VIP tables. Suddenly, the ambient chatter in the ballroom shifted. The live jazz band playing softly in the corner seemed to fade as a subtle, electric current ripped through the crowd. I didn't need to look at the entrance to know what had happened. I had spent nearly 2 decades in the military. I knew the distinct gravitational pull of high-ranking brass entering a room. The heavy oak doors of the St. Regis Ballroom had opened, and a delegation from the Department of Defense walked in. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. At the head of the group was a man whose presence commanded absolute, terrifying respect. He wore a perfectly pressed navy uniform, his chest heavy with ribbons that told the story of 40 years of combat, strategy, and unparalleled leadership. It was Admiral Thomas Gallagher, commander of Joint Cyber Command, a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and notoriously, the most ruthless evaluator of defense contracts in Washington. Behind him walked a phalanx of aides, captains, and defense liaisons. I recognized 2 of them immediately, Captain Harris from Naval Intelligence and Major Davis, one of my own direct subordinates at the Pentagon. A ripple of panicked excitement ran through the Omnicorp executives. This was it. This was the man who held the keys to their billion-dollar dreams. I saw Greg instantly straighten his posture. He practically sprinted over to Richard Whitmore, whispering furiously. I could read Greg's lips from across the room. I'll make the introduction. I've got this. Richard looked nervous, but he nodded, allowing Greg to take the lead. I watched as Admiral Gallagher stopped near the center of the room, politely declining a glass of champagne from a trembling waiter. His sharp, steel-gray eyes scanned the room. He wasn't here to party. He was here out of obligation, and he looked incredibly bored by the civilian pageantry. Greg stepped forward, flashing his most polished, million-dollar corporate smile. He approached the Admiral with the false confidence of a man who thought reading a Forbes article made him a tactical genius. Admiral Gallagher, Greg said loudly, ensuring everyone in the immediate vicinity could hear him. He extended his hand. Greg Peterson, Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives here at Omnicorp. It is a profound honor to host you tonight. I'd love to speak with you about how our new logistical synergy software can revolutionize your supply lines. Admiral Gallagher looked at Greg's outstretched hand for a long, agonizing second before slowly taking it. The shake was brief, cold. Mr. Peterson, the Admiral said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that carried perfectly over the hushed crowd. I don't handle software pitches at cocktail parties. My procurement officers handle that. Greg's smile faltered, but his ego wouldn't let him retreat. Of course, sir, but I assure you, my team has developed a framework that is completely unprecedented in the government sector. We operate at a level of efficiency your people haven't seen. Is that so? The Admiral replied, his tone dangerously flat. Absolutely, Greg doubled down, completely oblivious to the fact that he was currently digging his own grave. In fact, I was just telling my CEO that the military's current logistical chain is vastly outdated. We can streamline your operations by at least 40%. Richard Whitmore looked like he wanted to faint. Camilla was clutching her pearls. The other executives were staring in horrified fascination. You do not tell a four-star admiral that his operations are outdated to his face at a gala. 40%, Admiral Gallagher repeated. He turned his head slightly, looking at his aides. Major Davis caught my eye from across the room and suddenly stood at strict attention, his eyes widening in recognition. I gave him a microscopic shake of my head. Hold. Yes, sir. Greg pushed on, desperate to close the deal. I know government workers mean well, but they lack the fast-paced, high-stakes operational knowledge that we in the private sector possess. Take my wife, for instance. She works in government logistics. Good woman, but strictly a paper pusher. She wouldn't know the first thing about rapid deployment or classified asset management. The room went dead silent. My heart turned to ice. It was one thing for Greg to insult me in the privacy of our home. It was another for him to belittle me to his colleagues. But to use me as a punchline to impress a four-star admiral? To dismiss my service, my rank, and the blood I had spilled, all to stroke his own pathetic ego? That was the line, and he had just sprinted across it. Admiral Gallagher's eyes hardened. Your wife works in government logistics? Yes, Greg chuckled, shaking his head. Strictly 9 to 5. Union breaks. You know how it is, Admiral. The bureaucracy. The Admiral didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. Instead, his gaze shifted from Greg's smug face and began to scan the crowd. He was looking for someone. Major Davis, Admiral Gallagher barked, not taking his eyes off the crowd. Sir, Major Davis responded instantly. Am I misremembering? Or did the Director of Joint Intelligence Operations just return from a highly classified extraction in North Africa this morning? She did, sir, Davis replied clearly. Wheels down at Andrews Air Force Base at 0400 hours. And did she not orchestrate a supply line drop through heavily contested airspace that saved 32 Allied lives? She did, sir, flawlessly. Greg looked entirely confused. Admiral, I'm not sure what. Quiet, Gallagher snapped. The single word cracked like a whip. Greg snapped his mouth shut, his face draining of color. The Admiral's eyes finally locked onto mine, standing in the shadows by the marble pillar. A slow, deeply respectful smile spread across his weathered face. He ignored Greg completely, stepping around my husband as if he were nothing more than a piece of irritating furniture. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as the four-star Admiral, followed by his entire military entourage, walked directly toward me. As they closed the distance, The crowd parted. Brenda's jaw was practically on the floor. Richard and Camilla were staring with wide, terrified eyes. And Greg turned around, watching the most powerful man in the room approach the wife he had just told not to embarrass him. Admiral Gallagher stopped 3 feet in front of me. He snapped his heels together. The room echoed with the sound as Major Davis, Captain Harris, and the rest of the aides mirrored the movement. Admiral Thomas Gallagher raised his hand in a razor-sharp salute. "Colonel Peterson," the Admiral's voice rang out, vibrating with authority and deep respect. "It is a damn honor to see you. I was told you were resting after North Africa." I stood tall, the years of training locking my posture into perfect military bearing. I didn't look at Greg. I didn't look at the CEO. I looked dead into the eyes of my commanding officer. "Rest is a luxury, Admiral," I replied smoothly. "And I heard the Omnicorp presentation might need a little oversight." The silence in the St. Regis ballroom was so absolute you could hear the ice melting in the crystal glasses. I returned Admiral Gallagher's salute with crisp, practiced precision, holding it for a fraction of a second before dropping my hand. Major Davis and the rest of the aides stood at ease. Behind the Admiral, Greg looked as though he had been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, suffocating on dry land. He looked from the Admiral to me, his brain completely short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile the obedient, invisible wife he had created in his head with the high-ranking military officer currently commanding the room. "Colonel?" Greg finally choked out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wheeze. "Chloe, what is he talking about? You work at a desk. You do HR and forms." Admiral Gallagher turned slowly on his heel to face my husband. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Peterson," the Admiral said softly, which anyone in the Pentagon knew was his most dangerous tone of voice. "Are you standing there telling me that you are pitching a multi-billion-dollar security and logistics contract to the United States Department of Defense, yet you do not even possess the clearance, nor the basic observational awareness, to know your own wife's rank and operational status?" Greg took a literal step backward. I thought. "You thought wrong." I stepped forward, my voice echoing clearly across the hushed crowd. The time for shrinking myself to fit into his fragile ego was over. "My name is Colonel Chloe Peterson. For the last 3 years, I have served as the Director of Joint Intelligence Operations. I don't process union breaks, Greg. I process satellite telemetry, hostile threat assessments, and the rapid deployment of special operations forces in non-permissive environments." I looked past Greg to where Richard Whitmore and Camilla were standing, frozen in absolute horror. Brenda, the woman who had mocked me 10 minutes earlier, was staring at the floor, her face flushed crimson. "Furthermore, Richard," I said, locking eyes with the CEO, "since my husband was so eager to discuss your new logistical synergy software, let's discuss it." Richard swallowed hard, nodding mutely. "Your software is a derivative of the Paladin framework," I stated, watching the color drain entirely from the Omnicorp engineers standing near the display boards. "You claim it can streamline our supply lines by 40%. What Greg failed to mention, or perhaps failed to realize, is that my department tested the Paladin framework 3 years ago. We discarded it because its encryption protocols are highly susceptible to brute force attacks via compromised field radios. If we used your software, Mr. Whitmore, it wouldn't just be inefficient. It would get my soldiers killed." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered executives. That can't be right," Greg stammered, desperately trying to salvage his shattered reality. "Chloe, stop. You don't know what you're talking about. You're embarrassing me." "Enough." Admiral Gallagher's voice boomed, cutting through Greg's pathetic defense like a combat blade. The Admiral stepped closer to Greg, towering over him. "Mr. Peterson, the only person embarrassing you tonight is yourself. You brought a profoundly flawed product to my table. You insulted the intelligence of the United States Armed Forces. But worst of all, you stood in front of me and disrespected a decorated officer who has done more for this country before 0400 hours this morning than you will achieve in your entire miserable lifetime." Admiral Gallagher turned to Richard Whitmore, who looked as though he might be sick on his custom Italian shoes. "Omnicorp's bid is officially rejected," the Admiral stated coldly. "Do not contact my office again." If you want to do business with the military, I suggest you learn the basic tenets of respect and situational awareness. Because right now, your leadership is a liability. Richard's face contorted in fury, but he didn't direct it at the Admiral. He turned his terrifying glare entirely onto Greg. The promotion, the billion-dollar contract, the future of the company, all of it vaporized in an instant, entirely due to Greg's arrogance. Colonel Peterson, Admiral Gallagher turned back to me, his expression softening into one of immense pride. My staff is heading to the bar at the Mayflower to debrief the North African extraction. We could use your insight if you aren't tied up here. I looked at Greg. He was a shell of a man, stripped of his bravado, realizing in real time that the woman he thought was beneath him was actually the one holding the entire sky upon her shoulders. He wasn't a titan of industry. He was just a loud, insecure man in a rented tuxedo. "I am completely finished here, Admiral," I said, a profound weight lifting off my chest. "Lead the way." I didn't look back as I walked out of the St. Regis, alongside Admiral Gallagher and his team. The crisp autumn air of Washington, D.C. felt different this time. It felt like freedom. I shared a drink with my colleagues, briefly discussing the realities of the extraction mission, surrounded by men and women who understood the cost of the uniform. For the first time in years, I didn't have to monitor my words or diminish my presence. I was simply Colonel Peterson. When I finally took an Uber back to our townhouse, it was past midnight. The lights were on. I walked through the front door to find Greg sitting on the edge of the leather sofa, his tie undone, a glass of scotch trembling in his hand. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic panic. "Richard fired me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "He didn't even wait until Monday. He fired me in the lobby of the hotel." I walked past him, heading straight for the stairs. "Chloe, wait!" He scrambled up, following me to the bedroom. "You have to fix this. You know that, Admiral. You can call him, right? Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him I was just nervous." I pulled my duffel bag from the closet, the same bag I used for rapid deployments, and threw it onto the bed. I started tossing my uniforms, my civilian clothes, and my essentials into it. "There's nothing to fix, Greg," I said calmly, not breaking my rhythm. "Admiral Gallagher saw exactly who you are, and tonight, so did I." "You lied to me," he suddenly shouted, his fear morphing into a defensive rage. "You let me believe you were just a desk worker. You humiliated me on purpose." I stopped packing and turned to face him. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. "I never lied to you, Greg," I said softly, staring directly into his eyes. "I told you I managed government logistics. I told you I handled personnel. You were just too absorbed in your own self-importance to ask what that actually meant. You needed me to be small so you could feel big. I didn't humiliate you tonight. I just stopped hiding." I zipped up the duffel bag and hoisted it over my shoulder. "I'll have my attorney send you the divorce papers by the end of the week," I said, walking past him toward the door. "Chloe, you can't just leave," he pleaded, reaching out for my arm. I stopped, looking down at his hand until he slowly pulled it back. "Watch me," I said. I walked out of the townhouse, leaving my diamond necklace on the foyer table. It was a beautiful piece of jewelry, but it felt like a collar, and I was done wearing it. 2 years have passed since that night. I never saw Greg again, though I heard through the DC grapevine that he struggled to find work in the defense sector after the Omnicorp disaster. He became a cautionary tale about arrogance in the Beltway. As for me, I didn't just survive the fallout, I thrived. 6 months after the gala, I was promoted to Brigadier General. I now command an entire division of joint intelligence, surrounded by people who value loyalty, competence, and quiet strength. My father was right. The loudest guy in the room is usually the weakest. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to put others down to stand tall. True power is knowing exactly who you are, doing the work when no one is watching, and being ready when the moment finally calls your name. And when that moment comes, you don't have to ask anyone for permission to shine. You just stand at attention and let your actions speak for themselves. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, or if you've ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated your worth, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of resilience and empowerment. Drop a comment below sharing your own moments of triumph. I read every single one. Stay strong and never let anyone dim your light.